Hey everybody, I had a great idea for starting this episode about the DM screen by having me sitting behind the DM screen, but unfortunately my mic is right here, and when I put the DM screen up like this, all of a sudden I sound like I'm at the bottom of a well. So that is not the most point. I have an idea. Hang on one second. Hey, there we go. Fantastic. Okay, so how was I going to... When last we left our heroes. See, that's how you can tell D&D has started. We're not talking about movies or work anymore. I am sitting behind the DM screen, and I say, when last we left our heroes. Okay, we can get rid of this. This week we're going to talk about the Dungeon Master's screen, about why some people use one and why some people don't. We'll talk about some of the history of it and some of your options as a DM when it comes to choosing your DM screen. Yes, there is more than one choice. So you saw how I begin my D&D game. I say, when last we left our heroes, and the players know, oh hey, it's time to play. It's a tradition of mine and the players like it. I used to then recap what happened the week before, but I don't do that anymore. Because one of the things that I noticed was when the DM tells the players, here's what happened last week, suddenly they're getting a view of what happened the week before from my point of view. And because I sit behind the DM screen and because of my authority as a dungeon master, my description of what happened the week before sounds more authoritative. It sounds more real than how they remember it. And even though you may not realize it, there is almost always a difference between how you remember things and how your players remember things. That's something you're going to learn pretty quickly once you start running the game. Every session of D&D is kind of like Rashomon. Each player, including you, remembers things differently. And when you jump in and you start describing how you remember things, suddenly they feel like that's the real way it happened. And when it disagrees with what they think happened, now you've got a problem. So one of the things I've noticed is that asking my players, okay, who wants to sum up what happened last week, acts as a terrific diagnostic tool. It helps me understand, what do you guys think happened last week? And it's useful because often it turns out they don't realize what kind of a jam they're in. Or alternatively, they think that this is going to be a horrible fight coming up, but in fact it's not. Or maybe they think this NPC's angry at them when I didn't think that. Or maybe they think they solved a problem when I didn't think they did. And rather than contradict them, it gives me the opportunity to kind of change things behind the scenes to accommodate them. Because I don't feel comfortable contradicting them and saying, no, that's not what happened. Let me tell you what happened. I mean, sometimes at critical points, obviously that's necessary. But generally, I like to err on the side of the players. So I try to keep my mouth shut and I try to actually encourage my players to tell me what they think happened, because then I get their point of view and that helps me decide what really happened last week. There's a tendency to be like, no, this is how I remember it and I'm the DM, so that's the right way. When in fact, if that brings you into conflict with the players, it's best to err on their side. So that's just a little piece of advice about how to start your game. So I do use a DM screen. I have ever since I started. And the 5th edition DM screen, I think, is actually pretty poor. At least it's not, let me put it this way, it's not well suited for the way I run the game. You can kind of tell based on what information Wizards of the Coast put on the DM screen, what they expect you to be doing with the game. For instance, there's a whole panel here, I don't know if you can see it, for NPC generation, rolling a random NPC, including giving him a random name. 1/4 of this whole thing is dedicated to making random NPCs, and that's not something I really need. It's easy for me to make up names and invent NPCs on the fly. I'm a writer. So maybe you find that useful, maybe you like this DM screen. There's also a cool chart on here, which I like a lot but never use, called Something Happens. And you roll a d20 whenever your game kind of grinds to a halt and the players are bickering, and this helps you get inspiration for what to do next. For instance, you roll an 11 and someone gets angry. And that's all good and well, but I have different needs as a DM. In fact, one of the things I find baffling is that there's no list of things players do in combat telling me what types of actions they all are. That's something I definitely need, because my players will often ask me, well, can I draw my weapon? Can I drink a potion? Can I use this magic item? And I have to kind of make a ruling on the fly, which is sort of how D&D 5 is supposed to be run. But there are answers to these things. They're in the player's handbook or the DM's guide, and I can never remember them off the top of my head. That's one of the problems with having run the game for 30 years is I remember lots of answers. I remember the right answer from several different editions of the game, which are now wrong answers. So it would be nice if that stuff was on here, and it kind of bums me out that it's not. But the good news is, with only a little bit of work, you can find online variations on this that other people have made. PDFs and Google Docs that you can download and print out, and if you buy one of these, you can just paperclip your own version to it. I'll put a link in the doobly-doo to a bunch of different versions. You can look at them and pick the one you like. That is, if you decide to use a DM screen. Like I said, not everybody does. I tend to think of not using a DM screen as something old school DMs do, older school than me. But in point of fact, I read an article with Jordan Weissman, the guy that founded FASA and WizKids, in which he describes going to a game store that Dave Arneson ran. Dave Arneson's one of the guys that invented D&D, and Dave Arneson ran D&D for Jordan and his buddies, and he did it from behind a full-body screen. He was completely obscured while he was running the game, and I think the effect he was going for was the voice of an omniscient narrator coming from nowhere. Except, of course, it's coming from behind that screen, which is kind of weird to me. And I remember when this article came out, a lot of people said they thought that was weird, and then a lot of people came out of the woodwork who had played back in the early 1970s who said, no, actually a lot of people, including Gary Gygax, ran the game from behind full-body screens. You wouldn't see them at all. I'm not sure how long that tradition lasted, but the idea was that you were exploring the dungeon, not reading the dungeon master, and that obscuring his face meant that you couldn't see what his reaction was to the things you were doing. It also gave him the opportunity to change maps behind the screen, and you wouldn't even know he was doing it. So that seems pretty weird to me, but I bet if I had played back then, I would have thought it was pretty neat. So my friend Jim Murphy has been running D&D since around then, around 1976, and he never uses a DM screen. He thinks of them as a kind of crutch, and also he doesn't like that feeling of being separated from the players. And keep in mind, this is one of the best DMs I've ever played with. But, and he's not here to defend himself. I should have interviewed him for this. In fact, maybe I will. Maybe I'll go have coffee with Jim and I'll do a little Q&A with him. So if you have any questions for a guy who ran D&D back in 1976, let me know and I'll ask Jim. So I think the reason Jim doesn't use a DM screen is that he feels it's a kind of cheat. He feels like if the players see you rolling behind the screen, then they will think that the results aren't real. Whereas if he rolls the dice in front of you, then you all know that is objectively what would have happened. I rolled a 20 for the orc, he critically hits you. I didn't just decide the orc critically hits you because you've had an easy time of it this evening. We all saw the die, it said 20, you were critically hit. And that is undeniably true. When the players see you, the DM, rolling in front of them, they suddenly get apprehensive. That is a real roll and there's nothing anyone can do about it once it's done. And that's probably the number one job of the DM screen, is to give you, the DM, the opportunity to roll behind the screen. Jim does not have the opportunity to roll behind the screen. He doesn't have the opportunity to, as they call it, fudge the die rolls. Why would you want to fudge the die rolls? Why would you want to lie to your players? Well, don't think of it as lying to your players. Think of it as curating the experience. In fact, original D&D back in 1974, the DM rolled all the dice. He rolled the dice for your character's stats when you made your character. Right, I want you to think about that. You didn't get to make your own character. The DM rolled all your stats, he rolled your to-hit rolls, he rolled your damage rolls. Now, again, that seems super weird to me, but when you think about it, that means that D&D back then was a much more curated experience. Let's say you wanted to play a fighter. I would tell you, oh yeah, no, I rolled an 18 strength for you, fantastic, but I got a 6 intelligence. Right, I could give you a character with stats that were good and the things they needed to be good in, but I could pick 1 or 2 things that were not that good to give you some interesting role-playing challenges. We don't do it that way anymore, although I think there is still a good reason for the DM to make some rolls. For instance, one thing many DMs do, I have done in the past, and I probably will do it in the future, is they'll make a little cheat sheet behind the screen with each PC's name on it, and they'll have on there what each character's perception bonus is and their stealth bonus is. So that when the players say, I hide in shadows, they don't roll, you roll. Okay, why would you do that? Because I think there's an argument to be made that it's unrealistic for a player to know, is my character successfully hiding in the shadows? It doesn't matter what you rolled, your character certainly thinks he's hiding in the shadows. As opposed to an athletics check, if you try to jump a chasm, you objectively know if you failed or not. But something like hiding, I think your character doesn't know how well hidden he is, so why should the player? And then you get some interesting drama. The player starts to wonder, did I make it? Did I do a good job? Now, that's not to everybody's taste. I don't do that currently, but I'm thinking about doing it again. I think my players would like it. And there's a good argument to be made for doing the same thing with perception. When you tell the players, okay, make a perception check, you just told them there was something to notice. And if they all fail, they know they didn't notice it. And that is another way to break verisimilitude, I think. Break suspension of disbelief. Suddenly the players go, oh, what did we miss? Which is not really what you want them to be thinking. So again, there's not a right way to do this stuff. These are just suggestions. These are things I know DMs do, things I've done as a DM. And in fact, I got the idea from my friend Brad, who was one of my favorite DMs. He ran for me when I was a teenager, and I, as a player, really liked that style of play. So my friend Jim Murphy doesn't use a DM screen. He always rolls all his rolls in front of the players. And as a result, there's a lot more tension when he rolls because you know it's real, quote unquote. But the flip side of that is, and I'm not making this up, almost every campaign Jim has started began with a total party kill. Or sometimes there was one survivor, whatever. And that's because often Jim starts a new campaign when there's a new edition of D&D out, and since it's a new edition of D&D, he doesn't know the rules that well yet. I've actually had conversations with him after the fact where he said, wow, I thought that 4 Spectres wasn't going to be that hard for you guys. Because he remembers an edition of D&D where 4 Spectres wasn't that hard for us. And because he doesn't roll behind the DM screen, he doesn't have an opportunity mid-combat to go, wow, this battle is a lot tougher than I thought. I didn't mean for it to be this hard. So that's one of the purposes of the DM screen. It's to help hide your screw-ups. You didn't mean for this combat to be this difficult, but because you're rolling behind the screen, you have the opportunity to kind of miss every once in a while, do less damage than the dice actually said to do. And this is something where the first time you do it, it might be obvious, but after you've gotten the hang of it, you'll know how to do it in such a way that your players don't notice. I've gotten to the point now, I've been doing this for a while, where I generally roll in front of the players to increase that feeling of verisimilitude, but about 20 to 30% of the time I roll behind the screen. And most of the time, the only reason I'm doing that is so that when I need to roll behind the screen, it doesn't look so suspicious. Right? If you only ever roll behind the screen because you need to fudge a roll, your players will notice. One thing I try to avoid doing is fudging my dice to keep a bad guy alive just because I like them. Trust me, there are better ways to do that. One trick I've used, and this works especially well when the bad guy is an evil priest of a dark god, is if the bad guy isn't being as effective as I thought he would be and the players are going to kill him earlier than I thought, I just let them do their thing, the bad guy dies, and then I have their god kind of show up and say, no, I have plans for you, rise. And now they fight an undead, more empowered version of that same bad guy. That may seem kind of video gamey, but when it's happening to the players in the heat of combat and it's the villain of the adventure, it will seem epic. So that's the DM screen episode. Actually, I pulled out all my old DM screens. You can see my old Birthright screen here. This is from 1994, 96, I think. It's pretty epic. I apologize, my mic quality is going to drop a little bit here. And you can see that back in the day, the DM screen it wasn't landscape, it was portrait. I also have my slightly less old 3rd edition DM screen. I've run every edition of D&D since AD&D. I love them all for one reason or another, and in every instance, I got burned out on them eventually, just because the burden of some rules became, wow, holy crap, look at this. This is a little bit of memorabilia here for me. This is a little cheat sheet I made. I'll take a picture of it and put it up there so you can see it. I would do this all the time. I should start doing this again. It's just a list of all the different PCs in my game and then a bunch of columns. And in one column is their armor class. That saves a lot of time because I roll the dice and I know whether I hit or not. I don't have to say, I hit it. What's your armor class again? I also have on here each character's max hit points, and I would keep track of their current hit points over the course of the battle. Now that does cause more work from your point of view as a DM, and it may not be worth it for you, but I liked knowing what the player's total and current hit points were for a couple of reasons. For one thing, as the PCs level up, the difference in their hit points starts to become significant, and doing 20 points of damage to one character might bring them from full hit points to almost dead, whereas that same 20 points to another character might only take them to half damage. And it's useful to know which character am I about to kill with this attack. Also, keeping track of the running total means you know when you're about to kill a character, and I find that is useful information. Now, the goal here isn't to kill or not kill characters. The goal here is just to provide a plausible, dramatic experience. And sometimes you may discover that your own ignorance, or the player's ignorance, or the dice undermine that. I've had evenings where I couldn't roll less than a 17, and I realized if I keep doing this, the players are all gonna die. This wasn't a tough encounter until I couldn't miss. The opposite also happens. Sometimes I can't roll higher than a 3 and I think this is ridiculous. This is a cakewalk, and the players feel let down. They were expecting something dramatic, and in fact, it turns out to be not that memorable. Now, not every fight needs to be memorable. You should only be challenging the players at certain moments in the adventure. We'll have another episode talking about pacing. It's one of those things that once you've done it a couple times, you start to get the hang of it. But when you know each character's current hit points, that gives you the opportunity to have the bad guys discreetly switch targets from one to the other, so you don't end up accidentally killing a character when you didn't mean to. Lastly, I wrote down each character's saving throws, and I put a box around which one had the worst saving throw in each category, and that helped me make decisions running the bad guys. In a certain sense, it's cheating, because obviously the bad guys don't know what the different characters' saving throws are, but in another sense, the bad guys, I think, are roughly as intelligent as the good guys usually, and you can tell which of these characters is the priest, just like the good guys can tell which of the bad guys is the shaman. And typically the priest has a high wisdom save, so don't cast spells on that character that require wisdom save. Just like you can tell that the thief is the nimble, dexterous one, don't attack them with something that requires a reflex save. I think it's reasonable to assume you can tell by looking at a character which one's the smart one, which one's the nimble one, which one's the heavily armored one, and make decisions accordingly. But if you don't have these numbers, then actually it can kind of get confusing. It's also useful because as the players accrue abilities and magic items, it may seem harder and harder to challenge them. Remember, they outnumber you, 5 or 6 to 1. So having a little cheat sheet like this with their hit points and armor class and their saving throws, which gives you some idea of what the party's weaknesses are, can make combat a little bit more interesting. I guarantee you some people are going to say this is cheating, and that's fine. Don't do it if you don't think it's a good idea. I don't do this anymore. I haven't done this in a long time, although I'm thinking about maybe I should do it again. So that's the DM screen episode. Like I said, you'll find links in the doobly-doo to lots of other alternative DM screens that other players like you have made that you can print out. And if you go and buy a DM screen, from your game store, you can then just paperclip the printouts to the inside. And that allows you to customize your DM screen and put whatever you want in there. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked that episode. If you want to help support the channel, there's a link to my Amazon page in the doobly-doo. I'm an independent fantasy author in my spare time. I write fantasy novels. If you like D&D or you just like fantasy, you might like them. Read the reviews, read the description, see what you think. Check it out. I'd also like to give a shout out to my friend Jason Hill, who is one of the people that inspired me to start this channel. Jay has his own channel where he will help teach you how to be a 3D modeler and a character designer. That's what he does for Turtle Rock Studios. Jay's an incredibly talented guy. He's one of my best friends. I feel lucky to know him. Jay, I love you. Jay has a great video where he sculpts Judge Dredd in ZBrush. I'll put a link to that in the doobly-doo. Go to his channel, watch his video, let him know what characters from movies you'd like to see him sculpt. That'll motivate him to make more videos. He and I are having kind of a friendly rivalry where we're trying to see which one of us can get to 5,000 subscribers first. He has a huge head start on me, but I'm catching up. So go check out his videos and subscribe, but not until I hit 5,000 first. Next week, we're going to talk about what is in this box and why it might destroy your campaign, unless you're clever and take my advice and use it in an interesting way. Till next time, peace out.